Hi, I'm Elaine Kemp, and I'm speaking with Datlow from New York, former fiction editor with Omni magazine,
Yes.
World-renowned editor of anthologies, editor of Year's Best Fantasy and Horror,
And best horror.
and Best Horror.
Yes.
And it's absolutely delightful to speak with you again, Elaine.
Thank you. I'm back. Basically, your endangered species.
Yes.
Because I'm one of the few editors left who edits short stories exclusively.
Yes.
So yes, I edit science fiction and fantasy and horror stories, and have done for my whole career.
Yeah. I guess as a writer myself, what I'd like to know is what would you say to writers? What is your advice, given that you're the person that we're trying to persuade to buy our work?
Be persistent.
Yeah.
Keep sending things out. Rewrite. First of all, don't ever send out a first draft.
Yeah.
You have to figure out when you're done with your story. I mean, either if you have a writing group, go over it with them, or just when you're sure that you're ready to send it out, send it out. Don't just wait to get an answer about that one story. Immediately write another story. I mean, it could take months for you to get a response.
Yeah.
And also, don't give up. I mean, if someone rejects you, send it to the next market. Always start from the top market.
Yep.
I mean, a lot of people are saying, "Oh, I want to get published, so I'll do it at the bottom market where I know they'll take my work." That's not how you do it. Always start the top-paying market and work down. It does not hurt you to try the top market. Yes.
Okay, so never send your first draft, and don't be such a perfectionist that you never send a story out.
Exactly. Yes.
So it has to be somewhere in the middle.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you're not a writer unless you write. So,
Yes.
if you say, "Oh, I'm going to write this when I have time," "Oh, I write 5 minutes a week or something," that's not writing. You have to write every day, even if it's just a couple of hundred words.
Okay, and for you as an editor, what are you looking for in work?
It depends on the project I'm working on. For Best of the Year, I'm reading all the stories that have been published in that particular year. So,
That's an enormous task.
yes, it is. I try to read all the horror I can find in every venue, collections, mainstream collections, anthologies, magazines, literary magazines. If I know about it, I will read it. Sometimes it's hard to find out where the literary magazines are or if there are horror stories in them. But that process is a process of elimination, because I'll read and reread and reread and reread a story and end up with 140,000 words. I can only have a limited amount in the book. I'll make a notation as I read a story and to go back to it, that, oh, I like the story, and I'll go back to it. And then at the end of the process, I have to read and reread and get it down to 140,000 words. For any other kind of project, an original anthology, first of all, I go to writers who I've worked with, writers whose work I'm familiar with, and who might fit the theme if it's a theme anthology.
Yep.
And I'm looking for interesting voices, an interesting take on a theme. I will never say that, don't ever send me a vampire story. Of course, don't send me a vampire story if I'm editing a zombie anthology.
No.
But,
Unless they're vampire zombies?
Possibly.
Possibly.
But
maybe
if you,
not.
First of all, for that kind of thing, you have to stick to the theme.
Yes.
When I do a theme anthology, I try to have as broad a theme as I can, so that I can publish different takes that may not be thought of by the regular reader of that theme. And I'm just looking for stories that pop at me, stories that I think are more than mediocre. I mean, most submissions from people who aren't used to being published and who are just starting out are not that interesting, because they think they're doing something new and they're not.
So they haven't read enough?
Possibly, and maybe they just haven't written enough.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, the thing is, you can't only read in your genre. You have to read outside your genre. You have to be aware of what's going on, read nonfiction, read all kinds of things, read short stories, read the people whose work you like, but don't emulate them. Try to eventually create your own voice, which means developing what do you want to write about. What matters to me as a writer.
Yeah. Where is the narrative?
Yeah, well, what's the point? Why am I writing this story? The worst thing is getting a story and saying, well, I don't know why the stories were written. It's about nothing. Yeah. So,
Yes.
and that's kind of a nutshell. I mean, there's a lot more to it.
There is a lot more. And what about the importance of attending conventions, for instance, and forming communities with other writers and editors?
Community is important. I'm not sure conventions necessarily are, but with Facebook and LiveJournal and Twittering, individual communities of people who are interested in the same thing you don't have to be there in person. If you can't afford to go to a convention, conventions can be expensive.
Yes.
But you can create communities online. I'm in several listservs of like-minded people, a ghost story community I'm on, either boards or listservs, which are mailing lists. So you
Yes.
need, Yahoo mailing groups. So community is helpful because it's helpful and it's harmful. If you're not careful, you can become totally ingrown. I mean, you should be aware that there are things outside your community, but it can be very supportive for writers, especially writers who live in isolated parts of a country.
Yes.
So, and I love conventions. I love meeting people who are readers. I love meeting writers. For me, it's an ongoing party with my friends who are writers and the editors and the agents and artists. It's like this huge moving party around the world. So I like conventions a lot, especially when someone pays my way to get here from a far apart.
Yeah.
But they can be very useful. But you also have to be careful because you're meeting someone. If you're a new writer and you're meeting an editor, you could really screw up if you're really rude.
Yes.
I mean, that's the other thing. It's good to know what convention etiquette is, how to approach an editor. Like, you don't come over to an editor and say, "Hey, will you read my story?" It's like, please go away.
Yes.
No, I will not read your story.
Editors never take manuscripts with them, right?
Right, exactly. There are some excellent writing workshops for new writers. There's the Clarion workshop.
Yeah, you spoke to Carol earlier, Carol Riles, about going to Clarion. Yes.
It's the oldest workshop, I think, and there's a Clarion West in Seattle, in New York, in the United States, and there's Clarion San Diego now, and there was Clarion South for a few years in Brisbane, which right now is on hiatus. And it can be very useful. It's like 17 writers it's a 6-week intensive program. Each week is a different writer, and the fourth or fifth week you have an editor. And each week the participants have to write a new story, and they critique each other.
Yeah.
And it can be a very intense experience and a really good bonding experience. But it can be useful. It can be useful to make connections. But a lot of people can't afford that. But you can create your own local
writers
workshop
groups,
in your
communities.
own city, and that's it doesn't cost anything to do that, and it's very useful.
Thank you very much for spending time with us,
You're
and
very
it's
welcome.
wonderful to see you back in Australia.
It's a pleasure to be here. I can't wait to come back.
Thank you.